Welcome to Ethics Matter. I'm Magali Laguerre-Wilkinson. Joining us today is Chuck Collins, who is the director of the program on inequality at the Institute for Policy Studies. His latest book is called Born on Third Base, and he joins us today. Hello, Chuck. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me, Magali.
Thank you for being on. So your most recent title, Born on Third Base, let's start with that. What does that mean?
Well, there's a quote from a Dallas Cowboys football coach, actually, which is, some people were born on third base but thought they hit a triple. And I think there's sort of a mythology that even people who have a huge amount of advantage just still like to tell the story of how they did it all by themselves. So it's somewhat of a play on that. I mean, I was born on third base. I grew up in a wealthy family. I know I didn't get there alone. I mean, I know that I had this enormous advantage.
So you were born on third base. You had this advantage. You don't really know what struggle is per se, and at 26 you decide to give away your inheritance. That's very unusual.
I feel like I had a lot of advantages until then. I had a debt-free college education, but what happened in my mid-20s is I started to work with very low-income communities. I worked with mobile home tenants who were trying to buy their mobile home park. I kind of got an intimate front row seat into how people were struggling with declining wages and as inequality was starting to grow in the United States. But I also had this experience of growing up in an affluent, wealthy family. So I think at a certain point I started to feel like that wealth was a barrier to my making the path I wanted to make.
A barrier? How can wealth be a barrier? And I ask that because many people who might be listening or watching were saying, well,
Right.
He doesn't know struggle, and so I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yeah.
Wealth as a barrier sounds a bit of an unusual.
It's a different kind of barrier.
Yes.
It was a barrier to making my own way.
I see.
To choosing a work path that was independent of something that happened a century ago. Now, in retrospect, that's a complete myth. In my mid-20s, I thought I'm just going to give away this money and I'm going to become Joe regular guy, right? The fact is, multi-generational advantage sort of accrues over time. I have so much advantage that's wired into my life that I can't get rid of it. It's just part of it took me a little while to figure that out.
When you made this decision to give up your inheritance at 26, what did your family think?
Well, I think they were concerned. They were concerned, and particularly my father and I had a lot of conversations about it, and he's a really thoughtful, kind of caring person. And on one hand, I said, well, I appreciated the gift. It wasn't like a rejection. I was saying, look, you've prepared me well. I want to live without this. I want to move forward without it. But of course they're concerned because we live in an insecure society. And bad things can happen, even if you grow up in an affluent family. Long-term health care issues or children with special needs or whatever, things you didn't expect. Bad things happen. And I remember my dad even saying, bad things can happen. You grew up in a bubble. Do you understand, what that means? And in the end, it is somewhat of first acknowledging that I still have a lot of other advantage. So I can't pretend that I've given away all the advantage I have. But I have a stake, let's just say, in building a more equitable society.
There seems to be this tendency to lump the very wealthy because they live in this bubble, the world of private jets and boats and so forth. But you're trying to shift that in a way, in your analysis and what you've been observing through the years, to draw them more toward your way of thinking. Can you explain that a little bit? How are you going about that? I mean, these are not bad people.
Right.
And it's not their fault.
Yeah. I think the most important thing I try to say is, look, these extreme inequalities are bad for everybody. They're obviously really bad if you're struggling to survive. But actually, they create imbalance and undermine the quality of life, even for wealthy people. It's bad for the economy to have these extreme inequalities of income. It undermines healthy economic life. It creates social breakdown in social cohesion. I mean, we're essentially moving toward a Brazil kind of society where you have a very tiny wealthy elite that live behind walls, that have their bodyguards, and then a growing number of part of the population that's desperate.
How has that happened? Why is it happening?
Yeah.
And we hear a lot of people talk about it. I mean, this is what Bernie Sanders ran on.
Yeah.
And yet still, it's just so much more prevalent. I mean, we read lists of billionaires every year. We make news about it.
Yeah.
And yet there are people who are just barely making it paycheck to paycheck.
Well, I think basically for 40 years, the rules of the economy have been changed to benefit asset owners, people who own a lot of wealth, at the expense of wage earners. So tax policy, trade policy, keeping the minimum wage low. If you do that for 40 years, this is what we have. This is what you get. You get a society where wealth is concentrating at a dizzying pace. I mean, we now know, the three richest billionaires in the United States, Gates, Buffett, and Bezos, all combined have as much wealth as the bottom half of U.S. households. And that's partly possible because 1 out of 5 households has zero or negative wealth, and that number is growing. So we are pulling apart. It's structural. It's not because some people are working harder and others are not, although that's a very powerful myth. These are systemic changes in the economy, and they're human created. We can actually do something about this. We can change the rules of the economy to create a shared prosperity economy, as we tried to do after World War II. So my main message to people of other one percenters is it doesn't have to be this way. It's not in anyone's interest to keep moving toward a sort of economic and racial apartheid. We need to all get in there and reverse these inequalities.
You're calling this an economic apartheid. Two very strong words.
That's right. Yeah.
And that mean a variety of things, but mostly racial. Where do you see that? How do you see that?
Well, I mean, we have a historic racial wealth divide where the legacy of racism and wealth building has meant that it's sort of like the way the past shows up in the present. We have a racial wealth divide that is, obviously rooted in centuries of exclusion, but it affects Latinos and First Nations as well as African Americans. But if you just look at home ownership rates, median wealth, you can't say that this is something that's a result of even just the last generation. We're talking about multi-generational discrimination in wealth building and multi-generational advantage in wealth building. So even if I look at my own family history, 3-4 generations of a family business that was very, very successful, it's like advantages compound. Money makes money, and the power to influence the economy also affects the rules of the economy.
You bring up in your book the GI Bill.
Yeah.
Veterans come back from World War II. They're given a head start by the government with certain advantages, go back to school, buy a home, loans, et cetera, et cetera. But it wasn't for all veterans. And so what is the domino effect today that we're seeing from this program?
Well, I think the GI Bill also first-time homebuyer loan programs after World War II. So between 1945 and, say, the mid-'70s, we, the taxpayers, invested in things that put millions of families, almost all of them white, on the wealth-building express train. I've friends and family members who got Veterans Administration or Farmers Home Loans 1%, 40-year fixed-rate loans. Those were racially discriminatory. Black, Latino, First Nations veterans returning to the United States after World War II to sometimes Jim Crow education systems did not have access to some of those GI Bill college benefits. So it's kind of like we put one segment of society on the express train to middle class opportunity, and we left people of color standing at the station for the train that didn't show up. And so a couple generations go by, lo and behold, our home ownership rate, the white home ownership rate is about 70%, and black home ownership rate is like 43%. That we can point back to that period after World War II as one of the reasons for that.
It goes that far back, wow.
But what's interesting about that is that gave us a clue as we sort of know something about what to do. Like, we used to tax wealth at higher levels and higher incomes, and we invested in public goods, access to education, first-time homebuyers, infrastructure. Those are all things that are part of a shared prosperity economy that we could do without the discrimination and legacy of racism in implementing those.
You know, inequality in general seems to be the elephant in the room as a topic in American society. No one wants to talk about it, or if someone is incredibly wealthy, they do philanthropic deeds in certain programs that are very specific and so forth. But it's still a taboo subject. Why?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One is there's a sort of mythology or story of deservedness that sort of filters through inequality. So some people will say, well, so-and-so has so much wealth because they worked harder, they got up early in the morning, they created a better mousetrap, whatever. They deserve their wealth. And the shadow side of that story is, oh, those other people who don't have wealth or are living precarious lives, they deserve to be where they are. What's important here is to say these inequalities are deep and systemic and structural and delinked from individual effort. But that story still persists. Then I would say there's a certain amount of confusion and shame about class and wealth inequality.
People don't like to talk about class in America.
I think we would be better for having a much more open conversation about class. Just in the same way we need to talk about race and gender, we need to talk about class and how it works and the class cultures that we create and the class assumptions. So I think we'd be better off, and I think, you know, someone with my circumstances, the reason I'm, I guess, talking about this is because I think wealthy people should tell true stories about how advantage works, to demystify it, you know, because if you keep going around saying, yeah, you know, I got here because I worked hard, because I got in the batter's box and hit my own home run, or, you know, list all the ways, and we ignore, for instance, the way the GI Bill gave some people a huge head start or advantage, or the role of inheritance. One thing we're here in a Carnegie institution. Andrew Carnegie was an interesting guy because he obviously made a lot of wealth. He really thought the idea of inheritance was terrible. He's outspokenly opposed to this idea of inherited wealth. He believed it would undermine and create dynasties of wealth. And he created these institutions to try to educate around it. So well, we're looking for the next generation of Andrew Carnegies, and they're out there. I mean, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and others have said hereditary wealth and power, and if we keep allowing, you know, essentially this is where we're going. We're going to become a society that's a hereditary aristocracy unless we intervene and reverse these inequalities.
This most recent tax bill has made some people happy and other people very worried. From where you stand, from your perspective, what does this mean for the country?
Well, I think it violated the do no harm principle to addressing inequality. So it's sort of like throwing gasoline on our inequality fire. It will worsen the inequalities.
How so?
Well, it's a huge tax giveaway to global corporations who have already gamed the system substantially and are reducing There are a few temporary features of the tax bill that will show up in, you know, maybe some higher tax refunds or whatever. That's good. But it's mostly oriented toward those who already own capital and benefiting the already wealthy. So what you and I have already talked about, where it's like, let's give more advantage to the advantaged, and let's, you know, leave a lot of people out.
When are people going to start to notice this change? Is that something, this is not something that's going to happen overnight?
I think people are noticing it right now. I mean, it showed up in opposition to this tax bill. Polls show 70-80% of the public believe the minimum wage should be much higher, believe the wealthy should pay their fair share of taxes, believe that global corporations should stop gaming the system and pay their fair share of taxes. People are outraged at excessive CEO pay and the ways in which the wealthy are hiding their money offshore, there's a kind of a realignment or undercurrent in the public sphere that shows there's a whole awakening here. People think it's a scandal that young people have to take on $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in debt to get an undergraduate education. There is no social good that comes from that, except if you're a student loan lending corporation or something. Then, you're happy. But, again, go back to after World War II. We launched a whole generation, almost entirely white, with debt-free higher education in New York State, the CUNY system. California's, you could get a college education, pay for it by painting houses and working at a restaurant over the summer. You didn't have to go into decades of debt.
Right, of course not. Decades of debt.
So I think in the next couple of years, we're going to see a student, there's 40 million people in the society who are holding student debt, parents and rising students. That's a constituency that could press for some very, very fundamental reforms in how we do this.
You make this case in your book for cracking hearts open. We're not talking open heart surgery here, of course.
Yeah.
But it's by luring the advantaged people in the process of coming home, going back to the communities. How so? Explain the thinking of cracking hearts open.
People like me who grew up in my circumstances, not everyone, but had a certain disconnection, as you said at the beginning, from toil, struggle, need. It's not to say everybody's lives were easy or great, or families also had struggled with addiction and the like. But that disconnection, privilege is a disconnection drug. The more wealth and privilege you have, the more you're sort of disconnected from the rest of your fellow humans and the human condition, which is a certain amount of struggling and suffering as well as joy. And my message to my fellow wealthy one percenters is to come home. Stop traveling the world and being sort of flitting around and not being connected to place. Stake yourself in a community. Put your stake in that community and make sure it's the best, most equitable place possible. Not an enclave, but New York City or a community. And bring the wealth home. Bring the money that's now in this global financial casino or is hiding in the offshore system, bring it home. Don't put it into the making money paper trading. Put it in the real economy of goods and services that employ people. Bring the wealth home. Share the wealth. Not just through charity, but charity is important and philanthropy is important, but it's not a substitute for an adequately funded public sector.
So, and which would be contributing to infrastructure and that sort of thing to make a community come alive, to make a community better, to bring back something to a community.
And my point is that is entirely in the selfish interest of the wealthy in our society.
Shouldn't the government do that, though? I mean, if there's a disenfranchised area where, let's say, a subway or a bus doesn't go, so the person has to find a ride to get to the nearest stop so they could get to a job when normally it could take them probably 20 minutes. Shouldn't a federal or state government cover something like that? I'm asking.
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I'm saying philanthropy is not a substitute for an adequately funded, vibrant, healthy public sector paid for by a progressive tax system. So stop dodging taxes. Again, wealthy folks who have created all kinds of elaborate schemes to avoid paying their fair share, my argument is pay your darn taxes. Quit whining. In the years after World War II, during this period of shared prosperity, we had much more progressive taxes on high incomes. Andrew Carnegie advocated 100% tax on wealth above a very high threshold. Invest that in debt-free education for the next generation. It's a no-brainer in my point of view.
And if it is a no-brainer, why aren't more wealthy people jumping on that bandwagon?
Well, I think actually some of them are. So there's a segment of wealthy people, I call them the unreachable rich. They're having a good time, they're very happy inside the story of their own deservedness. And they're disconnected so severely from the struggles of the rest of humanity, we're going to have a hard time inviting them home. But there are people, there's this network called the Patriotic Millionaires, there's a young group network called Resource Generation. There are these networks of wealthy people who are lobbying for fair tax policy. The Patriotic Millionaires were out there publicly opposing this tax cut, saying, don't give us another tax cut. Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, others have been very outspoken. Don't give us more tax breaks, right? And so I think.
And are they asking for it? I mean, is this something that millionaires and billionaires are asking for, as a tax break?
Well, some of them are.
Yeah.
Some of them use their lobbying infrastructure to get more tax breaks. And they have a theory which is, hey, we're the engines of the train, we're the job
The
creators.
backbone of society.
We should all just prostrate ourselves and exult before us and give tax breaks, and maybe we should just give them money directly from the Treasury, which is what some of them lobby for. But my point is, there's a segment of people who are among the wealthy and then there's another segment that are just not engaged. And part of my work and message is to go out and say, you know what, come home. And this is where the cracking open hearts matters, because people are walled off, emotionally from their neighbors.
They live in their own gated community within, basically.
But want connection and want to be part of humanity, don't know how to relate to it. It sounds like a stretch, but let me tell you, I'm encountering it every day. People are waiting to be called to something bigger and grander than buying something, than consumption. They want to be part of a vibrant society that works for everybody. Not everybody, but that's the majority of people want to be part of something more meaningful.
So when Chuck Collins calls, are they running in the other direction, or is your philosophy welcomed?
My message is, I don't hate you, fellow rich person. In fact, I love you. I want you to come home and rejoin humanity. I want us to be a more healthy, connected society. I don't want to polarize and pull apart and become a society of walls and bodyguards. It doesn't have to be that way. So you have everything to gain, from rejoining humanity. It's like coming to the party. Come to the party. There's a woman I interview in my book who described growing up wealthy as being the kid outside the ice cream parlor, looking through the window at the people having a party in there and wanting to know how to get in there. And this is not true for everybody, but there's a lot of wealthy people who are sort of like disconnected, living, looking through the window at the rest of humanity's experience. Now, the more unequal we become, the more unattractive it's like, am I going to get on the subway today? Am I going to, wait for the bus like everyone else is? As our common institutions sort of deteriorate, it's harder to say, come home. But actually, this is the time we need people.
But sometimes also on the other side of it, because there's that disconnect, the person living in that disenfranchised community, or not even so, or who's just not in the millionaire or billionaire category, what do they have in common with someone like that?
Well, first I should say, it's understandable if people are angry or feel betrayed. I think that there's huge segments of our communities that have been just left behind. And I think my message to everyone else is we need to wake up and organize and defend our communities against the most dangerous aspects of extractive capitalism that are hoovering up wealth from our neighborhoods and communities, and just look at what's happening to real estate in all of our largest coastal cities right now. You have global wealth coming in, buying up land,
Yes.
building structures, many of which are not even occupied.
None.
They're just piggy banks for global capital to hold wealth. This is hugely disruptive. We need to defend our communities, come together to defend each other.
I feel like that's been happening.
Yeah.
But you need power to
Yeah.
be able to do that,
Yeah.
right?
You need power. And in the process, we have to remember not all the wealthy people are against you. And we need to find the ones who are potential allies to be part of that coalition. Somebody said to me recently, oh, we live in a plutocracy. There's nothing we can do. My point of view is there's a lot of cracks in that wall, including among the wealthy, who are some of whom are starting to understand they don't want to live in that racial and economic apartheid society either. That actually they don't want their children and grandchildren to grow up. What is your legacy going to be? Another pile of cash?
Chuck Collins, thank you very much for talking to us and for discussing this very important and ongoing topic. I'm sure we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Please come back. And that's it for this edition of Ethics Matter. I am Magali Laguerre-Wilkinson, and we will see you next time.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.